Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something a little bit different, and honestly, it is incredibly fascinating. We are taking the rich, often heartbreaking lore of Dark Souls, specifically looking at the legendary Knights of Gwyn, and we're running it through the lens of ancient literary theory. We're going to see exactly how blending the classical mechanics of epic poetry with modern video game design creates these absolutely unforgettable emotional experiences. Let's get right into it.
So think about this for a second. How exactly do modern video games replicate the sheer emotional weight and tragedy of a classical epic, like Virgil's Aeneid? In classical literature, we are constantly watching heroes wrestle with massive, heavy themes, crushing guilt, overwhelming responsibility, inescapable destiny. But how does a video game, a medium where you are the one actually holding the controller, translate those ancient themes into a dark fantasy world that you have to actively explore? Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with adapting the interactive epic, then meet the four legendary knights. From there, we'll look at Artorias and the Abyss, witness the fall of Oolacile, and wrap up with a legacy of grief.
All right, Section 1, Adapting the Interactive Epic, Blending Literature and Play.
To really wrap our heads around this, we can look at the work of researcher Rebecca de Heuvel, who actually adapted Virgil's ancient epic, the Aeneid, into a choice-based video game. Her work perfectly aligns with a 2022 observation by Sanders, which points out that game mechanics aren't just there to give your hands something to do. They actually communicate tone. They build this interpretive possibility space for you, the player. So when you're swinging a massive, heavy sword or struggling against an impossible boss, the struggle itself is the story. The game's mechanics are expressing tragedy just as effectively as written dialogue ever could.
And that brings us to a huge academic concept for today's explainer: narrative determinism. This is basically the agonizing tension between a character's illusion of free will, their autonomy, and their totally inescapable grim destiny. Researcher Catherine Isbister points out that video games are uniquely powerful at pulling out feelings of responsibility and guilt through this exact tension. Because you aren't just sitting back watching a hero fail, right? You are forced to actively walk them right to their doom. Keep this idea of narrative determinism in the back of your mind as we meet our cast.
Moving on to Section 2, the four legendary knights, Gwyn's greatest warriors.
In Dark Souls lore, Lord Gwyn had four elite commanders. We're talking the absolute peak of divine might here. You've got Ornstein, the Dragon Slayer, with his lightning cross spear, Artorias, the Abyss Walker, wielding great swords with the Wolfring for just unmatched poise, Ciaran, the Lord's Blade, a terrifying shadow assassin using the Hornet Ring, and Goff, Hawkeye, a giant wielding these massive great bows. On paper, they are an invincible pantheon, but the narrative determinism of Dark Souls guarantees that these incredible specialties actually set the stage for their absolute ruin.
So the real tragedy here is how their defining traits become the exact mechanisms of their downfall. Ornstein, the fiercely loyal captain who waited centuries in an empty city, ultimately just abandons his post in despair to go find the nameless king. Goff, the eagle-eyed sniper who could literally shoot dragons out of the sky, is mockingly blinded with tree resin by the people of Oolacile. Ciara, the cold, ruthless assassin, is completely paralyzed by this profound, quiet grief. And Artorias, the one man who could walk the abyss, he is eaten alive by it.
Which brings us to Section 3, Artorias and the Abyss, a hero's impossible choice.
We're going to focus intensely on Knight Artorias now, because his story just perfectly captures that tension between autonomy and dark destiny. When we look at the timeline put together by the incredibly dedicated lore-hunting community, we see a hero just backed into impossible corners. First, he's sent to New Londo to fight the Dark Wraiths. But realizing he can't survive the dark, he is forced to forge a dark covenant just to fight it. That choice curses his divine sword. He fails anyway, New Londo gets flooded, drowning countless innocents just to stop the spread. And then, carrying the massive weight of that failure, he travels to Oolacile to confront Manus, the father of the Abyss.
And this journey builds that interpretive possibility space we talked about earlier. We know Artorias gained a ring to traverse the deadly abyss, but the game absolutely refuses to hand you all the answers. The Lord just says he made a pact with the beasts of the abyss. So was this dark pact made with manipulative primordial serpents like Cathay? Or was it Elvina, the mystical feline friend to his wolf companion Sif? The game actively invites us into the lore to debate the heavy moral weight of his desperate choices.
Section 4, The Fall of Oolacile, Consumed by the Dark.
So, the people of Oolacile were tricked into awakening Modus, and his wild humanity spiraled into this devouring abyss that started mutating the townsfolk into actual monsters. Artorias charges in to stop it, but his silver pendant is stolen, and he is just completely overwhelmed by dark magic. Knowing he's beaten, he makes a fatal, desperate choice. He sacrifices his divine cleansing great shield to throw a protective magic barrier over his young wolf companion Sif. Without his shield, his left arm is utterly shattered and his soul is corrupted. His choice to save his friend is exactly what doomed him. That is the unbearable weight of responsibility right there.
And what's wild is that the game communicates this immense tragedy visually without a single word of dialogue. Have you ever noticed the unusually skinny legs on Artorias' armor? Fans on Reddit pointed out a while back that this is not some quirky design flaw. It is horrific visual proof that the Abyss literally rotted his physical body away from the inside out. It melted his armor right over his decaying frame.
Think about the contrast here. The uncorrupted hero had unmatched skill, divine protection, an unbreakable will of steel. But what you, the player, actually step into the arena to face? A mad beast, howling in the dark, in putrefied armor, with a shattered arm just hanging there uselessly. Narrative determinism forces you to perform a devastating mercy killing. You don't feel victorious when you win. You just feel the heavy guilt of ending a broken legend.
Section 5. A Legacy of Grief, the Aftermath of Tragedy.
Because the story definitely doesn't end when Artorias' health bar hits 0. The game forces you to navigate the emotional fallout of this tragedy just by exploring the environment and meeting the survivors.
Right after you defeat Artorias, you find Ciaran in the arena, building a small grave for him. She actually asks you to hand over his soul, the very soul you just fought so incredibly hard to claim, so she can give him a proper send-off. And right here, the game uses its interactive possibility space to test your moral agency. Do you keep that powerful soul for the gameplay benefits, or do you surrender it to honor a grieving friend?
If you look into the future of Lordran, in the overgrown Darkroot Garden, your exploration leads to a genuinely heartbreaking discovery. Hidden behind the massive gravestone, the one guarded by a fully grown Sif, there is a female corpse clutching Ciaran's signature hornet ring. Ciaran tended to his grave until the very end of her life. She literally never left his side. Finding that item for yourself fuels the emotional weight in a way that a cutscene simply never could. Just one single soul. That is what it takes to trap an entire future generation. Centuries later in Dark Souls 3, the Abyss Watchers partake of the wolf blood, binding their souls into one shared soul that traces all the way back to Artorias. And in doing so, they lock themselves right back into that exact same narrative determinism. They swear to guard against the Abyss, and inevitably they are corrupted by it, forced to slaughter each other in the dark, echoing Artorias' tragedy in this vicious, completely unbreakable cycle.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. As we piece together these scattered item descriptions, as we walk through this environmental storytelling, and as our own hands execute these devastating conclusions, does our active participation make the tragedy of Lordran hurt even more than merely reading a classic epic? When we hold the controller, we aren't just observing destiny, we are enacting it. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep exploring the lore.